Hello and welcome to 7 Minutes in History, the YouTube channel that gives a unique and expert insight into historical events and people, all within the space of a short 7-minute documentary. This first episode is going to be covering the spread of the plague, or more commonly known as the Black Death, with a close look at how it spread through Europe and to England in 1348. Most people already know a little bit about the Black Death, which was the spread of the bubonic plague throughout Eurasia and the most fatal pandemic in human history that we know of, with a cataclysmic death toll of nearly 200 million. But did you know where it was first cited, or how the Black Death spread to and within England, or most importantly, how it became an inspiration for a famous children's nursery rhyme? This short 7-minute documentary will cover all and more. The Black Death is actually the second outbreak of the bubonic plague at this point, with the first, known as the Plague of Justinian, occurring in the 6th century and mainly hitting Constantinople and the surrounding area, but later spreading to Europe. The plague mutated and returned as the Black Death, proving to be even more deadly. While the actual origins of the Black Death is dubious, it has been pinned down to emerging first in Central Asia in the 14th century, either in what is now modern-day Mongolia or China. Some argue they can even pin it down to originating in what is now Crimea, but it's hard to verify. But how did the Black Death make its way from Central Asia to Europe and then to England? The answer is the medieval superhighway of its time, the Silk Road. This was a network of sea and land routes that connected the Far East with Europe at the time. But as well as facilitating the ability to trade goods, it also allowed diseases to transmit across the Eurasian continent, maximising the spread. As well as being a network for trade, it became a network for disease. There are many stories of the Golden Horde of the Mongol catapulting corpses infected with the plague into the port city of Kaffa during a siege, which subsequently infected the city and allowed further transmission to Europe, although it's more likely it was just spread by rats. Once the Black Death reached Europe, it spread across the continent like wildfire. Italy succumbed to the plague first, with Spain and France following suit before it finally arrived in England. The first recorded case was from a seaman arriving in Weymouth from Gascony in 1348. By summertime in 1349, the entire country was ravaged by the Black Death. Due to a lack of records, the exact numbers are dubious, but it's certain that the country faced a death toll of over 30% of its population, a toll not seen again since. Now, England at the time was very much how you can imagine. A typically rural population with a reliance on agriculture and a feudal system, relying on peasants to work the fields while being effectively employed by noblemen. Big cities were few and far in between, with London estimated to have a population of around 70,000 before the Black Death. The crown at the time was with King Edward III, who oversaw the country through successful military campaigns on the continent, as well as improved trading relations with Europe. England had dodged the aforementioned outbreak of the plague to the European continent in the Plague of Justinian back in the 6th century, so it could be argued that England was less prepared to tackle an impending epidemic, much like can be inferred from the differences between the East Asian states handling the COVID-19 pandemic compared to the European nations. But why exactly did the plague never reach England in the 6th century, but affected it so badly in the 14th century with the second plague outbreak? What set England apart from Europe during the Plague of Justinian? Well, we know that the main plague carriers are rats, and it's their close proximity to humans in society that causes the transmission. When looking at artwork and records, it's clear that rats were pretty much non-existent in England up until around the 13th century. Rats were notably absent in documents of pests in England recorded back in the 10th century. However, by the 14th century there were many mentions of rats, and there is even evidence of rat poison being sold regularly in shops. So we can infer from this that at some point in the 13th or 14th century the rat population boomed in England, and as the plague was passed to rats and killed them off, the disease then moved on to spreading amongst humans. From first arriving in Weymouth, England in the summer of 1348, the plague had reached London by autumn and spread to Yorkshire by February the next year. By that summer in 1349, the whole country was ravaged by the Black Death. A person's socioeconomic status at the time played a large role in the risk to succumbing to the plague. In the 14th century, England was still largely feudal and an agricultural society, with peasants and serfs doing the bidding of noblemen. The aristocracy, the wealthy, and those in a high social standing were able to generally dodge the disease, with only one case being recorded in the royal family, occurring during a visit to France at the time. But the effect on the poor was catastrophic. There is evidence of whole villages being wiped out, with the peasant population dying. This then created a second crisis in England, wherein the majority of the labour force in the agricultural sector died due to the high mortality rate amongst the poor, leading to food shortages for the next few years, which again affected the poor and dodged the wealthy. Some argue this was one of the contributing factors to the peasant revolt some 30 years later. The north was particularly vulnerable at the time due to successive wars and invasions from the Scots. However, in 1349, after an attack on the city of Durham, the Scots brought back the Black Death to Scotland, with them causing a massive outbreak in 1350. However, by later in the year it was declared that the Great Pestilence had ended. But this was not the end, with a second, a third, and fourth pestilence returning in later years, although none were as devastating for England as the Black Death of 1348 to 1350. And there you have it, your 7-minute in history video of how the Black Death spread to England. But did you know what famous nursery rhyme it inspired? If you like this video and would like to see more, please don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments if there are any other topics you would like me to cover. I look forward to seeing you next time.